Welcome to Pastor Wale Speaks on Family Life. Today I'll be talking about discipline and children. Discipline and children. Discipline is such a very important part of parenting. For without it, a child will become a dysfunctional adult. You look at a child today and see patterns in its behavior, and it's a good forewarning of what the child could be when the child becomes an adult. God himself disciplines us, his children. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 6 says, he chastens us because he loves us. He declares that he who spares the rod spoils his child. If you spare the rod, you hate your child. So we need to start with, what is the objective? Discipline is not there for discipline's sake. There's an objective to discipline. Discipline is to correct an errant child. So the first objective of discipline is to correct an errant child. Discipline also helps to train a child, especially in the area of self-control. A child now, with discipline, learns to control itself. And then to train a child to obey those in authority over him or her. So we've got to keep the objectives of discipline in mind, because there will be times when you're going to have to apply discipline, and it will be painful. It will be painful to you that's applying the discipline, but you've got to remember there's an objective in mind. There's a goal. That is why you're applying discipline. Nobody enjoys, at least nobody should enjoy, just caning a child or punishing a child. But as long as you bear the objective in mind, then you will be doing something worthy, because you're preparing that child for a successful adult life. And because the child has also learned the benefits of discipline, the child will also discipline his or her own children. Now, there are many different ways of disciplining a child, and these would vary according to the age of the child. So discipline has to be age appropriate. Apply the right discipline for the child. Okay. Now that's on the one hand. On the other hand, discipline could also vary according to the offense. It is important that when you discipline your child, you don't do it in anger, but with careful consideration. Many people have disciplined children in anger, and so they apply the wrong method of discipline in the wrong way, and it becomes counterproductive. Here are some of the common forms of discipline: smacking, withdrawing privileges, restricting children to a naughty corner, caning them, giving them extra chores to do in the house or what have you. Now, having said that, you can see from these that you smack a little child. I would not advocate caning of a child that is not yet in their teenage years. You don't send a 16-year-old into the naughty corner. That's more appropriate for somebody. A child is in their 10s. It would be painful to a teenager if you withdraw certain privileges or place certain restrictions on them, such as curfews and so on and so forth. So there are many different forms of discipline. Extra chores. I think giving a child chores to do in the house is quite an important thing to do. Anyway, forget about discipline. It's important that children learn to look after the home and learn to take responsibility. But when a child misbehaves, then that child could be given extra work to do in the house. But whatever form of discipline you do use, it must not cause any physical, mental, psychological, or emotional harm to the child. Whatever form of discipline you use, it must not cause any physical, mental, psychological, or emotional harm to the child. There's this father that was very angry with what his child had done, and he just took his belt off his waist. He just took the belt off the waist and beat the child with the belt. Now, unfortunately, most people that are going to use a belt to beat somebody, and now that's not what the belt was made for, will hold it at the end of the buckle, but he didn't. He held it at the other end, and the buckle, cut a long story short, took out the son's eye. Okay, that could never have been the father's intention. At least I hope not. But in the end, that's exactly what happened. He took out the child's eye because of anger, because he couldn't stop himself and carefully consider what form of punishment would suit the child, the child's behavior. So that's one type of harm. There are those. I remember I had colleagues, contemporaries, who were very frightened of their parents. They were afraid of their parents. That's never supposed to be what the emotion that the child has towards its parents, being afraid of your parents. And so it's important that we do not cause that kind of fear. That's an emotional consequence of the wrong kind of discipline. Psychological harm can also harm a child. Emotional harm can be caused when a child begins to feel inferior as a result of the punishment that's constantly meted out to him or her. Psychological harm can be caused when a child is put in harm's way. So discipline is meant to correct a problem, not to create a new problem. And wherever discipline is not carefully applied with careful consideration, let me put it that way, wherever discipline is not applied with careful consideration, the consequences may create a new problem that wasn't the plan of the parents. So it's important to correct the problem, not to create a new one. Also, physical discipline must not cause an unintended physical harm. I recall a young man had been misbehaving and in boarding house after lights had been turned out, and he was wearing, well, the Yorubas would say Loshomodi. He just had a wrapper around him, didn't have anything on, and the vice principal came into the dormitory and saw him misbehaving, and the vice principal was a strict disciplinarian. He told him to bend over. He was going to get 6 strokes on his buttocks. You know what happened? As the vice principal went to beat him, to cane him on his buttocks, he hit his testicles. And that caused him terrible pain and harm. So discipline should be so carefully done that it doesn't cause any physical harm. There are people that just strike their child. Your child misbehaves and you just slap him or just box him. These are totally verboten, forbidden. Never use that kind of spontaneous punishment on a child. It's not going to help the child. It is dangerous. Striking your child with your fist could be a killer weapon. Striking your child with your fist, that can be very dangerous. God endorses punishment with the cane. He does. Proverbs chapter 22 verse 15 says that foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction will search it out. So it is perfectly okay to cane a child. However, that caning must be properly dispensed and not done arbitrarily, not done haphazardly, but done by somebody who knows how to apply the cane. And I've been caned before, And I know that some people are much better at applying the cane than others. So sometimes maybe you learn how to use a cane. Okay. Um, Proverbs chapter 23, verse 13 says, if you beat a child with the rod, he will not die. Okay? If you beat a child with a rod, it's not going to kill him. Okay? Proverbs chapter 23, verse 14 says that if you beat him, you will deliver his soul from hell. So here it is, it's used as a preventative measure. And sometimes just the fear of discipline is enough to get a child walking correctly. Okay. Another scripture quickly, Proverbs chapter 29, verse 15 says that the rod of reproof gives wisdom, but that a child that is left to his own devices brings shame. So the rod of reproof brings wisdom, but a child that is left to his own devices brings shame. That's an inevitability. So this is why it's important that parenting includes discipline of different methods. I have seen that even a 2 or 3 year old child, if properly taught, will go to the naughty corner when they're sent there. They know what it's for. They take to that punishment because they know they've done something wrong. And most of the time the children know they've done something wrong, but children will constantly push the envelope. They will keep on pushing the barriers to see how far they can go before they attract discipline. They know they've misbehaved, but they'll try and test how far they can go before their parents react. So we've got to be very, very appropriate in the way we discipline our children. I think that using the rod is more appropriate for children that are in their late 10s and early teens, but not for young adults. Don't cane young adults. Okay? I don't think it's wise. Smacking is more appropriate for young children, but should not be done in anger. Sometimes it is the shame of being smacked that is the punishment, not the pain from being smacked. And we need to understand that. A child that is smacked in front of other children feels a sense of humiliation. It's the shame of being smacked that does the greater part of the correction than the pain. So there's no need to try and inflict pain. Just make sure that the child knows that they're being punished. Okay. Whenever any form of discipline is applied, the child should be made clear to the child what he or she has done, and that you are correcting that behavior by punishing or disciplining them. Okay, there's no point just beating a child if the child doesn't understand why he or she is being beaten. And so it's important to make known what you're doing. Other forms of punishment can also be very effective, such as the withdrawal of privileges, like going out to the cinema. Or if you say to a child, you misbehaved, no ice cream this week. And where the brothers and sisters who behave themselves normally are still having the privilege, that child is going to be very careful not to misbehave in the future. Another thing is once you have announced the punishment, go through with it. Go through with it. Don't let me give you an illustration. You see a mother at the supermarket with her little child. The child is probably about 5 years old. The child sees a bar of chocolate and wants the bar of chocolate. Mom says no. And the child throws a tantrum, throws herself on the floor, screams, shouts, kicks, and does all that. And mom turns around to the child and says, I will never bring you shopping again. Okay? But then next weekend, there they are, out shopping together. That same mother with her child. Now, just imagine, what would this child think of the mother's never? The child would be thinking to herself, my mother's never means I will. See, and then that child gets taught in scripture that God said, I will never leave you or forsake you. The child says, well, he probably will. He's just saying it. because the child is learned to take you as an authority figure. When you say never and you don't honor it, then why should God honor his never? Okay, so once you've decided and announced a form of punishment, stick to it, carry it out, go through with it. Okay, and if there's some mitigating circumstances why you choose not to continue with it, explain it carefully to the child so the child knows that there is a circumstance you hadn't taken into consideration when you introduced the punishment. Extra punishment or extra chores in the home can be a very good deterrent from bad behavior. Many of us grew up having to do certain things at home. I'm sad to say I discovered that many children don't even know how to make their own bed. Not as if they don't know how to make other people's beds or their parents' bed. They don't know how to make their own bed. They get out of bed in the morning, they leave the bed just as they slept in it. They've not been taught how to make their bed. One day they may have to make their beds themselves. Not always going to have help that will do it. You may not be able to always help, and that's not a curse. But, we should make sure our children do get used to doing chores, and sometimes add chores to their chores. When children misbehave, isolating them can be a very good deterrent. Just isolate them from the other children. There's a naughty corner in the house. Everybody knows that if you misbehave, that's where you're going. You can't leave. You're there. You're not tied there. You're not forced there. You're not clamped in there. But you're there because your parents said you should stay there, and you know that if you didn't stay there, there will be far more serious consequences. So you stay in the naughty corner until your parents say, okay, you can leave. And usually a minimum of 30 minutes. Okay. Now, here's a problem. Many parents have delegated the responsibility of disciplining their children to others. Disciplining children is a parental responsibility. Nobody can discipline your children like you, and you need to take charge of discipline. They need to know it's coming from daddy or it's coming from mommy. Today a third party disciplines a child, and the child goes and complains to daddy or mommy, and mommy go fight. There's a common saying in our African culture that it's a village that brings up a child. And this is to say that anybody in the village has the authority to introduce some measure of discipline. Unfortunately, many children will report at home that uncle this or that person did or said this to me, and parents are up in arms. It just doesn't help. So we've got to, in the worst case situation, make people know that if your child misbehaves outside, it's perfectly okay for them to come and report the child to you, and they will see you actually taking steps to deal with the child's misbehavior. Well, I think that's mostly what I have for today. I've been very happy to be able to bring this. I do want to emphasize that I think discipline is a very, very, very important part of parenting, and a lot of parents are just not applying discipline to their children. You're not punishing yourself. You're doing your children a disservice, because they will not have the discipline, the self-control, and the correct behavior that will help them have successful adult lives. Okay, so please preach this gospel, discipline of children, and let's do it with maturity. Let's do it after careful consideration. Let us not rush into it, and let's make sure that our children benefit from it to the fullest. It's been a pleasure bringing this episode to you. I'll be back again on Thursday, by God's grace, with another episode of Pastor Wale Speaks on Family Life. Until then, all of you that have joined, I say a great big God bless you. Thank you for joining today. Please share it with your friends, and have a great great day, and see you Thursday evening. God bless.